I'm a nonfiction girly, which means when it comes to the world of fiction, I sometimes don't know the right direction to go. The last couple of years, I've been trying to get a little bit more into reading fiction, so I have things that I can actually talk about at parties with people who read books, instead of just being that like weirdo in the corner who's like, I read a great book about evolution. And so I can actually have shared culture with people. I've been reading the Women's Prize for Fiction's long list, short list, just kind of picking and choosing for the last couple of years to get accustomed to reading little stories. I've reached the point where I'm now working through some of the classics, the Bronte sisters, Austen. The thing about Victorian era novels is that, there's always some relative dying and bequeathing their wealth on an individual whose, life would be changed by them getting wealth, and it always happens in, the third act of the book. I mean, I love it. I have no notes. That's a great plot twist. I enjoy it every time. It always hits when the woman of no means comes into a great wealth. There's never a time that it happens that I'm not like, this is the best thing that happens. So anyways, while I'm readjusting my brain chemistry on that level, I've been quite delighted to hear that the Women's Prize is now doing a list of nonfiction books. When the Women's Prize for Nonfiction announced, I looked at the list and I was like, yum, 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 yum. Can't wait to devour this all. I did what any normal person does, and I went to the library and I requested copies of every single book on the list. Now, not every single book on the list is available. When the list was authored, not all of the books were published. And then on top of that, my library is not really interested in purchasing all of these books. So I think I was 5 shy of getting all of them. And then once I had all of these books, I was like, wait a minute. Am I really going to read 11 books? I mean, in the scope of a year, yeah, I'm going to read 11 books. But between getting all these books and the short list being announced, it's not practical. So I got all these books together, and I decided to do the next logical thing, which is I'm going to try to predict the winner of the Women's Prize for Nonfiction just by looking at the covers of these books and ranking them in that way. When I went through this process, it was pass or fail. But since this is YouTube and I know you guys love these little ranking thingies, we're going to go ahead and rank all of these on a board as we go through. The top tier is going to be need to read, which means if I saw this at the library, I'm checking it out. If I see this at an airport bookshop, the number one place to buy books, I'm walking away with it. If I'm at Barnes and Noble and I'm just there to get out of the rain or just to kill some time and I see this book, I'm picking this book up. This book's coming home with me because I need to read it. The next category down is would borrow, meaning I would request this book in interlibrary loan if necessary to borrow this book. Next category below would be, oh yeah, I wanted to read that. Meaning if somebody mentioned this book at a party, I'd be like, oh yeah, I wanted to read that. Was it any good? If I hear about it, I'm going to ask about its whereabouts. Is that book doing okay? Is it fine? The next category low is going to be can skip. I mean, it didn't do me any wrong. I don't have anything against it, but it's not speaking to me. And the category below that is going to be instantly forgotten. I pick the book up, I put it down, and it leaves no mark on me. My brain changes in no shape or form. No neurons fire. Nothing has been adapted in response to me interacting with this book. Leah Chang's Young Queens. When I saw this book on the long list, I was actually pretty excited, but then once I had it in my hands and I reviewed the front cover and the back cover, read the summaries provided, and read the inside sections, I no longer was interested in reading it. This one we're going to put can skip. I was also very excited about A Flat Place by Noreen Masood. I didn't know that it was a memoir. I thought it was more so about dealing with complex trauma. And then when I read the covers and I realized that it was a memoir, I became much less interested. This one, if I came across this at a bookshop, at the library, I wouldn't even dwell on the thought of this book. So it's going to be instantly forgotten. The Dictionary People by Sarah Ogilvy. And oh boy, do I think the publishers did Sarah dirty with the cover design of this book. The colors are so ugly. When I picked it up from the library, I was repulsed by this book. That being said, I think that the content of the covers is quite good and interesting. I think that this is a neat concept for a book based off of the pitching. Do I think I would buy it? Absolutely not. Now, there are alternative cover designs of this book and most of the other books on this list that accompany the fact that they've been nominated for prizes, but I'm not judging those. I'm judging this, and the colors are weird. Cannot stand it, but this is a cute concept for a book, which is why I'm going to say I would ask about it at a party. If somebody was like, oh, I read this good book, and they said this book, I'd be like, was it any good? So yeah, I would say, oh yeah, I wanted to read that. How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. This book is a prime example of a cover being so compelling that it changes the way that you think of a book. The graphics really interesting, but if you look at the quote at the top, it's dazzling, potent, vital, a light shining on the path of self-deliverance. And who's that quote by? No other than Tara Westover, the author of Educated. That quote alone made me ask myself if I wanted to read this, because that quote positions this book in culture by tying itself to another book that was well received. However, when I read the rest of the cover, this book isn't necessarily something that I want to read. It becomes a very complicated can skip, but I will say that quote has stuck in my mind ever since. And now when I think of this book, I'm like, oh, that's Educated for Rastafarians. And that's just good marketing. Eve by Kat Bohannon. If I saw this one at the library, I honestly do believe I would be walking out with this book with me. This is another example of strategic author quoting. Not on the front, but on the back, there is a long author quote from the author of the book 1491. And the other night, I was at a dinner party, and it turned out that I was the only person at the dinner party who hadn't read 1491. And the reason why I haven't read it is because it makes me very sleepy when I try to start reading that book. But positioning it as a book that is similar to 1491 made me want to read this book. And spoiler alert, I have since read this book, so I can very confidently say this book for me, need to read. Next up, we've got Tia Miles, All That She Carried. And if you notice, this isn't the normal copy of this book. This is a large text version of the book. Because I've read this book before, I thought it'd be rude for me to take it out from the library. So I decided what I would do is I would check out the one that I knew where it was, bring it home for a day, and then immediately take it back. So this is the one where I knew where it was, so it's the one I grabbed. I took it back to the library as soon as I humanly could, I promise. Because I have gone out of my way to read this book before, I am going to list it as would borrow, because I did borrow it. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. I was so shocked to see this book on the list. That's because I'd been hearing about this book long before I saw its name on the list. There was a lot of press surrounding the launch of this book, and I was already interested in reading this book. So that combined with the content of the covers, the information that I glean from looking at this book, this is a need to read. I was so excited to have this book in my house. This book is burning a hole on my bookshelf. I need to read this book. Wifedom by Anna Funder. Once I got it from the library, I found this book to be incredibly attractive. I love the cover design on this book. I think the colors are really interesting. I think the photograph on the front is really interesting. And then the way that the book is pitched on the covers is really interesting to me. I also think that because I recently read a book that was a historical fiction that was similar in the concept to this book, that I'm primed for it. Also with the fact that I really like George Orwell's writing, that I'm just teed up to be the market for this book. But for me, this book is a would borrow. Thunderclap by Laura Cumming. The content on the covers could not be better for me. Another judgment criteria that I've been doing for these books is I flip through them to see if there are any pictures, because I do believe that adults deserve picture books. And this book is chock full of pictures. It's got beautiful cover design. It has interesting excerpts on the outside telling you a little bit about the book. And it sounds like it's right up my alley. This book is a would borrow. Vulture Capitalism by Grace Blakely. And here we have another case of why did they do that to these colors? I think that the colors of this book definitely make it stand out. And if you're walking through the aisles of a bookshop, it will stand out to you. It'll be very obtrusive. It'll call your eye. You will look at it. And that's the goal. But I do think there are other ways to arrive at that goal than picking just the most garish colors that you possibly can. That being said, this book has a very strong graphic appeal to its covers. And color aside, I think this is a very attractive book. I think the concept is also really compelling. I think that the cover does aid the mission of getting this book read. And for that, I will say this book is a need to read. The Britannias by Alice Albinia. This book, I feel like, was done so dirty by the cover design in the sense that this looks so boring. I was quite excited to read this book from the summaries that I read online, but then once it was in my hands and I saw the cover design, I was like kind of let down a little bit by the way that they've decided to support this book with these graphics. And once I had read the materials on the inside covers and on the back cover, this book really slipped for me. It went from being something that like I definitely wanted to read to being something that I guess I would let somebody else read, and then if they told me about it, I'd be willing to take their recommendation. Some People Need Killing by Patricia Evangelista. This book has an incredibly attractive cover. So much effort went into the design of this, and it's incredibly obvious. I love the graphic elements, I love the color, but it became very evident from reading the cover that this book was not what I look for when I look for a book to read. It comes across as like quite intense and sad, and I decided that I very much did not want to read this book. And because it does not align with what I look for in a book, I could very much categorize this is instantly forgotten. There's nothing really that I see in this book that would bind to any of the neurons telling me to keep this book in mind. After judging all of the covers, I did what I believe to be the next logical thing. I went through and I read the first 20 pages of all of these books. Now, the thing about books in general is that the page count on them does not necessarily reflect the amount of paper in the book. Like, a page in a book is not necessarily content in a book, right? There's like lots of blank pages that are there for whatever reason. I don't know. There's always like a million blank pages at the start of a book. But then like you have indexes, you have introductions, you have forewords, yada, yada, yada. So 20 pages between all these books were not equal. At the beginning of my stat, I was more generous in what I was willing to count as a page and not a page. And then like near the second half of going through all these books, I was like, starting from the introduction, 20 pages, and that's all they got. And if I like let off mid-paragraph, fine. But some of these books I was like, okay, I'll read 23 pages if it gets to the end of the first chapter or something. Because some of these books are like really good, and then some of them did not speak to me at all. I've decided to rename the top of this short list, as I'm going to now reorganize this chart to have a short list and then everything else based off of what I read in the first 20 pages. We're going to start off, Eve is staying where it is. All That She Carried. We're going to put that up there because I've read the whole book and I believe that it deserves to be on the short list. So on the short list, we've got All That She Carried and Eve. Now, what about Doppelganger? So this one's quite good. I'm also going to have this one on the short list. Vulture Capitalism, also on the short list. Wifedom, we're going to put that on the short list. Britannias, we're going to put that in Instantly Forgotten. Thunderclap, so disappointed by this one. We're going to put that down in Instantly Forgotten. The Dictionary People, this I liked quite a fair amount. Out of 10, I gave it a 6, but I don't think that's enough to get on the short list. So that's going down here. How to Say Babylon. It was very poetic for my taste. That's also going to go down here to the fail section. And then super disappointing, Young Queens, that's going to go down into the instantly forgotten area as well. So we've got our short list, and then we've got everything else. Since I read the 20 pages of each of the books, the short list has come out, so we can actually judge my ranking. There were 6 books on the short list, and as you saw, I only put 5 books in my short list. When I read the 20 pages of each book, I did rank them out of 10, and there were 2 books that would have been tied for the 6th slot on the short list if I gave myself a 6th slot. And those books were How to Say Babylon and The Dictionary People. So I'm going to go ahead and put those books on here, sharing the 6th position. That being said, I was unable to get at least 4 of the books from the list. I was unable to get Matrescence, Intervals, Shadows at Noon, and Codependent, even though some of those books sounded and looked quite interesting to me. So I'm kind of like stuck between, do I give an empty slot or do I give half How to Say Babylon and half Dictionary People? So we're just going to have half of those on here for grading purposes. So here's my list. Now let's look at what they decided their shortlist should be. The official shortlist is Thunderclap by Laura Cumming, Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, A Flat Place by Noreen Massoud, All That She Carried by Tia Miles, Codependent by Madhumita Murgia, and How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. Now you look at this and you say, Julie, you're not doing too great. If you're not feeling particularly generous, you'll look at this and you'll say, Julie, you got 2 out of 6 right. That's a 33% success rate. And if you are feeling generous, you would say, Julie, you got 2.5 out of 6 right. That's at most 42%. Also not great. I'm fine with that because I'm going to push my luck here. I'm going to press my luck a little bit further, and I'm going to say I can predict who's going to win. And I feel confident in this because when I very first read the long list, I knew which book I think is going to win because I read this book last year and it was one of my favorite books of the entire year. I'm talking about All That She Carried by Tia Miles. When I saw that this book was on the long list, my first thought was, it was so nice of them to develop this award just to give it to this book. To me, it's very clear that this book is an outlier in all categories. It's just so well written, so well researched. It has to be All That She Carried. I'm very confident in this. I would say 80% chance that's All That She Carried, 20% chance it's How to Say Babylon. And I guess we're just going to find out if that's right or if it's not right. I'm willing to go on a limb here because it was like my very first thought upon reading the long list was they developed this award for this book. And I could be wrong, but I do think that book's going to win. Well, so this is like kind of a silly thing that I did. I don't anticipate this video is going to do very big numbers, but I'm interested in this content, so I'm making it for me because if we never follow our interests and do stuff a little bit outside of our comfort zone, we don't grow. So here you go, friends. I'm currently working on getting the Maths Nightmare avatar for neopets.com. And I am making some stuff around that, maybe. We'll see. And, also noodling some stuff for Flight Rising and stuff. Maybe some stuff for Dapper Volk, but I'm not making any promises. I've also have all these PowerPoints that I've made for like PowerPoint parties. And I was thinking about making some videos where I just present my PowerPoints because they're funny and good. And it's content that I've already made. I just have to like make the content of me talking to the camera about it. I only have to do all of the work. But anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this little look-see-loo into the world of competitive book listing. I don't know. I just thought this would be an interesting thing to do. I was hoping to get this out before the short list was announced because then that would add a little bit of like tension. But this works too. Still have the tension of who wins. So anyways, thanks you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.